Welcome back. Russia's attack on Ukraine could have big effects on notions of sovereignty in the worldwide Arctic region, including Canada's Arctic waters. Experts on Canadian Arctic sovereignty say Canada could be affected in a big way. Joining me is one of those experts. He's Rob Huebert, Associate Professor at the University of Calgary and a Senior Fellow with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Rob, thanks a lot for joining us. You've written a piece on this very subject for a publication known as Inside Policy within the past week, and you say that Russia's attack on Ukraine is having worldwide implications on notions of Arctic sovereignty across the world. Canada, you say, will be particularly hard hit by many of these changes, forcing Canada to rethink its entire understanding of Arctic sovereignty. Those are some pretty dramatic statements. Where do we begin in trying to understand where Canada lies here?
Well, the first thing to understand is, of course, with the Russian resumption of their attack on Ukraine, what we are seeing is the destruction of what many people have called the Arctic exceptionalism period. We've had very good cooperation with the Russians and with all the other Arctic states in a whole host of multilateral agencies, the most important being the Arctic Council. The Arctic Council has suspended action on the basis of the resumption of the Russian attack, and it's very doubtful that the Russians will want to come back, because with the entry of the Finns and the Swedes into NATO, which of course is now occurring, very unlikely that they're going to agree then to come back to an organization that has 7 NATO members. So that is starting to fall apart. We're seeing a whole host of other cooperative agencies. There's a Coast Guard forum, there's scientific endeavors. All of that from a multilateral basis really are either going to have to be completely redrawn or paused for a very long time. But the real issue, and the one that, of course, is the most important for the Arctic security of Canada, is the realization that the Russians are an aggressor state. And the Russians have actually threatened against the NATO allies, of which Canada, of course, is a member, the possibility of facing nuclear attack. When Putin threatens the use of tactical nuclear weapons, he's including us. And one of the entry points is through Canadian northern waters, particularly for Russian submarines and also Russian missiles that are known as hypersonics. All of these are threats that have been in existence for some time. But the resumption of fighting in Ukraine and the Western response to it has, I think, redrawn focus to exactly how dangerous of a threat the Russians have, in fact, evolved into.
How should Canada respond?
Well, one of the things that Canada has to be doing, it's been doing it at least at the rhetorical level, is to increase cooperation with both its NATO and NORAD partners. With NORAD, of course, is the Defense of North America. And we've been hearing a series of announcements from the defense minister that we are presumably going to be doing more things to modernize. The last time we modernized, by the way, was back in 1985. So we are seemingly going forward, but there are questions being raised in the context of the monies that are being promised, whether or not they are new monies, are they monies from before? And unfortunately, this government has a very bad track record in terms of actually committing new monies to what is necessary. In terms of NATO, of course, we have taken steps forward. We have said that we are going to be increasing our commitment to the Latvian battle group that we are now committed to. But of course, what we will need to be doing, and we haven't really thought this one through, at least there's no indication yet, is that the Nordic members of the alliance and the forthcoming ones, including Finland and Sweden, have been very active with the Americans, developing both an improved surveillance and a response capability. This is something that Canada is played at the margins, but hasn't really been heavily involved. And probably we are going to be pressured by our NATO allies to make sure that we're not the weak link when it comes to Arctic security. And I suspect that we'll be seeing greater pressure being brought on Canada beyond the commitment for the Latvian battle group.
Russia's attack on Ukraine was signaled or presaged in advance in a big way by comments made by Vladimir Putin to the effect that Ukraine's not really a sovereign state. Historically, it is Russian territory and so on. Has Putin made similar remarks with respect to the Arctic?
Well, he hasn't made any remarks to the Arctic because it's always been in the Russian interest to show that they are a good international corporate. Remember, and I want to make this clear, the war started not in February 2022. Putin invaded Ukraine in March of 2014. So that war has been ongoing for a long period of time. Putin has always tried to use the Arctic as a way of saying, okay, yes, we are going to go in, we're going to invade, seize territory, we're going to kill Ukrainians, but by the way, we're still a good corporate actor, and let's cooperate in the Arctic. And in fact, Canada did that. Harper had some mild sanctions against Putin when the war started in 2014. All of those were quickly reversed by the Trudeau administration. And so that Putin knows that by basically trying to portray that, at least in the past, that he can disengage and basically hopefully get the West to ignore what he's doing in the Ukraine. Now, this may be different because of the extent that he has gone, but he has threatened the use of nuclear weapons. And I think that is it's nebulous. He's not saying specifically against the North American continent per se, but it is understood if he was to use tactical nuclear weapons, any part of Europe, he would need to blind the Americans first, and that would mean attacking the bases in Alaska and Thule. And so Canada obviously is right in the middle of all of that.